An excerpt from the local newspaper detailed a chilling series of events. An ominous, unknown killer remained at large after weeks of brutal slayings. With little evidence found, the mysterious assailant seemed to be growing bolder, his shadow lengthening over the community. In a startling turn, a young boy claimed to have survived one of the killer's attacks and bravely recounted his harrowing tale. "I had a terrible nightmare and woke up in the middle of the night," the boy began, his voice still shaky. "For some reason, my window was open, even though I distinctly remembered closing it tightly before bed. I got up and shut it once more, then crawled back under my covers, trying desperately to drift back to sleep. That's when I had a strange, unsettling feeling, like someone was watching me from the shadows. I looked up and nearly leaped out of my bed in terror. There, in the faint ray of light filtering through my curtains, were two eyes. But these weren't ordinary eyes. They were dark, malevolent, rimmed in black, and they absolutely terrified me to my core. Then I saw his mouth, a long, horrendous smile that made every hair on my body stand on end, a grin of pure madness. The figure just stood there, silently watching me. It felt like an eternity before he finally spoke. It was a simple phrase, but uttered in a way only a madman could speak, a voice that crawled under my skin. "Go to sleep." I let out a blood-curdling scream, and that's what sent him lunging at me. He pulled out a knife, aimed right at my heart, and jumped onto my bed. I fought back with every ounce of strength I had, kicking, punching, rolling around, desperate to knock him off. Just then my dad burst in, his 12-gauge shotgun raised and ready. He aimed it at the man, almost getting him. But before he could pull the trigger, the man darted to the side with unnatural speed. With a swift, practiced motion, he threw the knife, a Bowie knife, I think, and it lodged deep in my dad's shoulder. My dad cried out in pain, dropping the gun. The man probably would have finished him off if one of our neighbors hadn't already alerted the police. We heard their sirens wailing as they drove into the parking lot. I went to the door and the man turned, sprinting down the hill into the darkness. As I stepped out of my room, I heard a violent smash like breaking glass. I saw that the window at the back of our house had shattered. I looked out, watching him vanish into the distance, a nightmare fading, but not gone. I can tell you one thing, I'll never forget that face, those cold, evil eyes, that psychotic smile. He'll never leave my head. Police are still actively searching for this man, described as a person of extreme danger. If you see anyone fitting the description in this story, please contact your local police department immediately. Ben and his family had recently moved into a new neighborhood, a fresh start. His dad had received a promotion at work, and they believed it would be best to settle in one of the area's more upscale communities. Ben and his brother Sam certainly couldn't complain. A new, larger, better house. What wasn't there to love about such a promising beginning? As they were unpacking their belongings, one of their new neighbors approached, a warm smile on her face. "Hello," she greeted warmly. "I'm Susan. I live right across the street from you. I just wanted to introduce myself and my son." She turned and called to a child playing nearby in their yard. "Jake, these are our new neighbors." Jake said a quick, "Hi," then scampered back to his yard to continue playing, seemingly uninterested in the new arrivals. "Well," Ben's mom Sarah replied, a polite smile mirroring Susan's. "I'm Sarah. This is my husband, David, and our two sons, Ben and Sam." They each introduced themselves, and Susan extended an invitation to her son's upcoming birthday party. Ben and Sam were about to object, a protest forming on their lips, but their mother quickly interjected, saying they would be delighted to attend, sealing their fate. Ben went to his mom, his voice a low grumble of annoyance. Mom, why did you invite us to some kid's party? They haven't even noticed I'm not some dumb kid. Ben, his mom admonished gently, her tone, we just moved here. We should show that we want to spend time with our neighbors and integrate into the community. Now we're going to that party, and that's final. Ben started to protest again, but stopped himself, a familiar resignation settling over him. He knew from experience that when his mom declared something final, there was simply no arguing. He walked up to his room, flopped down onto his bed, and stared at the ceiling, feeling a vague discontent. Suddenly, he felt a strange sensation, not so much a pain, but an odd, indescribable feeling, a peculiar hum beneath his skin. He dismissed it as just some random, fleeting sensation, a quirk of his body. A moment later, he heard his mom calling him downstairs to help with their belongings, and he obediently walked down. The next day, Ben came downstairs for breakfast and to get ready for school. As he sat eating his cereal, he once again experienced that familiar feeling, a subtle vibration within him. This time, however, it was stronger, more insistent, accompanied by a slight tugging pain that made him frown. He tried to ignore it, pushing it to the back of his mind. After he and Sam finished breakfast, they walked to the bus stop. They waited there, a typical morning scene, and then, without warning, a kid on a skateboard vaulted over them, clearing their heads by mere inches. Both Ben and Sam jumped back in surprise, startled by the sudden intrusion. "Hey, what the hell, kid?" Sam exclaimed, his annoyance clear. The skateboarder landed smoothly and turned back to them, kicking his board up to catch it effortlessly in his hand, a smug look on his face. He wore an Air Apostle shirt and faded blue jeans, exuding an air of casual menace. Well, he drawled, a smirk playing on his lips. "Looks like we got some new meat in the neighborhood." Suddenly, two other kids appeared from behind him, like shadows emerging from the periphery. One super skinny, almost skeletal, the other unusually large, towering over them. "Since you're new here," the skateboarder continued, his voice dripping with false friendliness, "I'd like to introduce ourselves. Over there is Todd." So, Ben glanced at the skinny kid. He had the kind of vacant, dopey face one would expect a stereotypical sidekick to possess. "He's Chad." They looked at the fat kid, who was indeed a tub of lard, his jowls shaking as he nodded. He looked as though he hadn't exercised since he was a baby, a lifetime of inertia etched onto his frame. "And I," said the skateboarder with an arrogant swagger, puffing out his chest, "am Kyle. Now, for all the kids in this neighborhood, there's a small price of bus fare, if you catch my drift." Sam stood up, ready to confront Kyle, his fists clenching, but his two friends simultaneously pulled out knives and pointed them menacingly at him, their blades glinting in the morning sun. "I had hoped you'd be more cooperative," Kyle said, his tone turning menacing, the smirk hardening into a sneer. "But it seems we must do things the hard way." Kyle walked up to Sam and effortlessly snatched his wallet from his pocket, a practiced move of casual dominance. Felt that strange sensation again, but this time it was very strong, an intense, burning sensation coursing through him, a rising tide of fury. He stood up, but Sam subtly gestured for him to sit back down, a silent plea for caution. Ben ignored his brother's plea, his eyes fixed on Kyle, and stepped forward, a dangerous resolve hardening his features. "Listen here, you little punk," Ben challenged, his voice firm and unwavering despite the knives. "Give back my brother's wallet, Or else, Kyle tucked the wallet into his pocket and pulled out his own knife, twirling it menacingly, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Oh, and what are you gonna do? He taunted, clearly underestimating Ben. Just as he finished his sentence, Ben delivered a sharp, unexpected punch to Kyle's nose. Kyle reached for his face in shock and pain, but Ben quickly grabbed his wrist and twisted it with brutal force, breaking it with a sickening snap that echoed in the sudden silence. Kyle screamed in agony, and Ben ripped the knife from his hand, turning the weapon on its former owner. Chad and Todd rushed in, their initial surprise giving way to anger, but Ben was too fast, a blur of motion. He shoved Kyle to the ground, then lashed out at Chad, who ducked instinctively, only to be stabbed in the arm by Ben's swift, precise thrust. Todd dropped his knife and fell to the ground, screaming in terror. Chad rushed him again, fueled by rage, but Ben didn't even need the knife. He punched Chad squarely in the stomach, a gut-wrenching blow that sent him sprawling down. As Chad fell, he vomited all over the place, a wretched mess. They saw the school bus approaching in the distance and knew they would be blamed for the entire incident, the evidence of the fight undeniable. So they began running as fast as they could, fleeing the scene. As they fled, they looked back to see the bus driver rushing over to Kyle and the others, a chaotic scene of victims and onlookers. When Ben and Sam made it to school, breathless and shaken, they didn't dare tell anyone what had happened. All they could do was sit and process what had happened, the adrenaline slowly receding. Sam simply thought of it as his brother beating up a few bullies, a justifiable act of self-defense. But Ben knew it was something more, something far scarier and deeper. When he felt that sensation, that burning surge, he understood how powerful it was, the undeniable urge to hurt someone, to inflict pain. He didn't like the implications of it, the darkness it hinted at, but he couldn't help but feel a strange, unsettling sense of satisfaction, a dangerous thrill. That strange feeling subsided and stayed away for the entire school day, even as he walked home. Given the incident at the bus stop, he probably wouldn't be taking the bus anymore, a small price to pay. Yet despite everything, he felt happy. When he arrived home, his parents asked him about his day, oblivious to the morning's violence. In a somewhat ominous voice, a chilling undercurrent beneath his words, Ben replied, it was a wonderful day. The next morning, a sharp, insistent knock sounded at the front door. Ben walked downstairs, a sense of dread already forming, to find two police officers standing there, their stern faces grim. His mother stood beside them, looking back at him with an angry, bewildered expression. "Ben," his mother began, her voice strained with disbelief and anger. "These officers tell me that you attacked 3 kids. They said it wasn't a regular fight and that they were stabbed." "Stabbed, son." Ben's gaze fell to the floor, a silent confirmation of his mother's accusation, the guilt heavy on him. "Mom, they really did pull knives on me and Sam." "Son," one of the cops interjected, his tone calm but firm, cutting through the tension. "We found 3 kids, 2 stabbed, 1 with a bruise on his stomach. And we have multiple witnesses proving that you fled the scene. Now, what does that tell us?" Ben knew it was useless. He could claim that he and Sam had been attacked, that they were merely defending themselves, but there was no proof that they hadn't struck first. They couldn't deny fleeing, as witnesses had seen them. Ben couldn't defend himself or Sam, his actions having left no room for doubt. The cop then asked, his gaze unwavering, "Shall we call in your brother?" Ben couldn't allow that. It was he who had beaten up all 3 kids. and he wouldn't let Sam take the fall. "Sir," Ben confessed, his voice trembling, slightly raw with burgeoning tears, "it, it was me. I was the one who beat up those kids. Sam tried to hold me back, but he couldn't stop me." The cop exchanged a knowing glance with his partner. They both nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. "Well, kid, looks like a year in juvie." "Wait," Sam suddenly interjected, his voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere. They all looked up to see Sam standing there, unexpectedly, holding a knife. The officers immediately pulled their guns, their movements swift and practiced, training them on Sam. "It was me," Sam declared, his voice firm and unwavering, a powerful conviction in his tone. "I beat up those little punks. I have the marks to prove it." He lifted his sleeves, revealing a series of cuts and bruises, meticulously arranged as if he had been in a prolonged, brutal struggle. "Son, just put down the knife," the officer urged, his voice calm, trying to de-escalate the situation. Sam held the knife for a moment longer, his eyes locked on his brother's, then dropped it to the ground with a clatter. He put his hands up, a gesture of surrender, and walked towards the cops, his gaze still fixed on Ben. "No, Sam," Ben cried, tears streaming down his face, a raw, desperate sound. "It was me. I did it. Poor bro trying to take the blame for what I did. Well, take me away. Please let Sam go." As Ben pleaded, his mother placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, misunderstanding his anguish. "Ben, please, you don't have to lie. We know it's Sam. You can stop." Ben watched helplessly, his heart shattering, as the police car sped off with Sam inside, disappearing down the street. A few minutes later, Ben's dad pulled into the driveway, saw Ben's tear-streaked face, and knew something was terribly wrong, an unspoken tragedy hanging in the air. "Son, what is it?" he asked, his voice filled with concern and dread. Ben couldn't answer. His vocal cords were raw and strained from crying, his throat tight with unspoken guilt. Instead, Ben's mother led his father inside to break the devastating news to him, their hushed voices carrying sorrow. Ben continued to weep uncontrollably in the driveway, the world blurring through his tears. After about an hour, Ben finally walked back into the house, finding his parents both shocked, saddened, and profoundly disappointed, their faces etched with a grief that wasn't entirely his own. He couldn't bring himself to look at them, couldn't bear to see how they thought of Sam as the culprit when it was entirely his fault. He simply went to sleep, desperate to get the whole nightmare out of his mind, hoping for oblivion. 2 days passed with no word from Sam at the juvenile detention center, no friends to hang out with, nothing but a crushing weight of sadness and guilt that suffocated Ben. That is, until Saturday, when Ben was awakened by his mother, who had a strangely happy, sunny expression, a stark contrast to his inner turmoil. "Ben, it's the day," she announced cheerfully, opening the curtains and flooding Ben's room with unwelcome light. "What? What's today?" Ben mumbled, stirring awake, still groggy from sleep. "Why, it's Jake's party," she exclaimed, oblivious to his reluctance. Ben wasn't fully awake yet, his mind still clouded by sleep and sorrow. "Mom, you're joking, right? You don't expect me to go to some kid's party after—" There was a long, awkward pause, the unspoken tragedy hanging heavy in the air between them. "Ben," his mother said softly, her voice attempting to be reassuring, "we both know what happened. I think this party could be the thing that brightens up the past few days, a distraction from all this sadness. Now get dressed." Ben's mother walked out of the room to get herself ready, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Ben fought the urge to stay in bed, to pull the covers over his head and disappear, eventually forcing himself to get up. He picked out a random shirt and a pair of jeans, the most casual things he could find, then walked downstairs. He saw his mother dressed in a smart dress and his father in a suit, both looking overly formal. He wondered why they would ever wear such fancy clothes to a kid's birthday party. "Son, is that all you're going to wear?" Ben's mother asked, a hint of exasperation in her voice, her forced cheer dissolving. "Better than wearing too much," he muttered under his breath, still resentful. His mother suppressed the urge to yell at him, hiding it behind a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ben, we may be overdressed, but this is how you go if you want to make an impression," his father interjected, trying to mediate the tension, a conciliatory tone in his voice. Ben grunted, a sound of defiance, and walked back up to his room. "I don't have any fancy clothes," he called down the stairs, his voice echoing slightly. "Just pick something," his mother yelled back, her patience wearing thin. He rummaged through his closet for what he would consider fancy, reluctantly searching for anything appropriate. He found a pair of black dress pants he kept for special occasions, almost forgotten. He also had an undershirt but couldn't find a proper button-down shirt to go with it. He looked around and found only striped and patterned shirts, none of which suited dress pants. Finally, he spotted a white hoodie lying casually on a chair and, with a sigh of resignation, put it on. He walked downstairs to find his parents already waiting by the door, impatiently tapping their feet. "You're wearing that?" his mother exclaimed, her jaw dropping slightly. She glanced at her watch, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. "Oh, no time to change. Let's just go." She herded Ben and his father out the door, a woman on a mission. They crossed the street to Susan and Jake's house, a sprawling two-story. They knocked on the door, and Susan appeared. Just like Ben's parents, she was way overdressed, adorned in a cocktail dress. As they walked inside, all they saw were adults mingling in the living room. The kids, wisely, were out in the yard. "Ben, how about you go out and meet some of the kids?" Susan suggested cheerfully, gesturing towards the back door. Ben walked outside to a yard bustling with children, all running around in strange, ill-fitting cowboy costumes and shooting each other with plastic guns that looked remarkably real. Felt less like a party and more like standing in the middle of a Toys R Us aisle on Christmas Eve. Suddenly, a small kid, no older than 7, approached him, handing him a toy gun and a flimsy cowboy hat. "Hey, mister, you want to play?" the kid asked, his eyes wide and hopeful. "No, kid, I'm way too old for this stuff," Ben replied, trying to sound dismissive to maintain his detached demeanor. The kid looked at him with an irresistible puppy dog face, his lower lip quivering slightly. "Please," he pleaded, his voice a tiny whisper. "Fine," Ben sighed, his resolve crumbling. He put on the hat and started to pretend shoot at the kids, a reluctant participant. At first he thought it was utterly ridiculous, feeling foolish and out of place, but then, surprisingly, he actually started to have fun, a genuine smile touching his lips. It was the first time in days he'd done something that took his mind off Sam, a fleeting moment of pure, unadulterated joy. He played with the kids for a while, lost in the childish make-believe, until he heard a distinct rumbling noise, a familiar sound of approaching danger. Then it hit him, a wave of cold dread. Just then, Kyle, Chad, and Todd all jumped over the fence on their skateboards, their figures silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Ben dropped the fake gun and ripped off the hat, his brief happiness dissolving into a chilling premonition. Kyle looked at Ben with burning hatred in his eyes, a promise of retribution. "Hello, Ben, isn't it?" Kyle sneered, a wicked grin spreading across his face, a truly unsettling sight. "We have some unfinished business to settle." Ben noticed a prominent bruised nose on Kyle's face, a reminder of their last encounter. "I think we're even," Ben countered his voice steady despite the apprehension. "I beat the crap out of you, and you got my brother sent to JDC. "Oh, no," Kyle scoffed, a dark amusement dancing in his eyes. "I don't go for even. I go for winning. You may have kicked our asses that one day, but not today." As he said that, Kyle rushed Ben, a furious whirlwind of vengeance. They both fell to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Kyle punched Ben repeatedly in the nose, a jarring, painful blow. But Ben grabbed Kyle's ears and headbutted him hard, a desperate act. Ben pushed Kyle off him and both rose to their feet, swaying slightly. Kids were screaming in terror. Their play abruptly ended. Parents were rushing out of the house, a cacophony of fear and confusion. Chad and Todd both pulled guns from their pockets, aiming them wildly. "No one interrupts," Chad warned, his voice surprisingly deep, "or guts will fly." Kyle pulled a knife on Ben and with the swift, vicious motion, stabbed him in the shoulder. Ben screamed in pain and fell to his knees as Kyle began kicking him repeatedly in the face. A brutal, relentless assault. After 3 agonizing kicks, Ben, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, grabbed Kyle's foot and twisted it violently, causing Kyle to fall to the ground with a cry of pain. Ben stood up, staggering, and began to move towards the back door, desperate for escape. However, Chad grabbed him from behind, cutting off his retreat. "Need some help?" Chad mocked, picking Ben up by the back of his collar with surprising strength and throwing him through the patio door with a deafening crash of glass. As Ben tried to stand, dazed and bleeding, he was kicked down to the ground again. Kyle began repeatedly kicking Ben, a relentless, savage attack, until he started coughing up blood, his body failing. "Come on, Ben, fight me!" Kyle taunted, his voice filled with cruel glee, picking Ben up roughly and throwing him into the kitchen. Kyle saw a bottle of vodka on the counter, grabbed it, and with a maniacal grin, smashed the glass over Ben's head. "Fight!" He threw Ben back into the living room, a broken doll. "Come on, Ben, look at me, chum," Kyle demanded, his eyes gleaming with a twisted satisfaction. Ben glanced up, his face covered in blood and shards of glass, his vision blurring. "I was the one who got your brother sent to JDC, Kyle snarled, twisting the knife. "And now you're just gonna sit there and let him rot in there for a whole year? You should be ashamed." Ben stiffened, a flicker of something terrible igniting in his eyes at the mention of Sam. "Oh, finally you stand and fight," Kyle cheered, misinterpreting the change. Ben was now on his feet, his face a grotesque mask of blood and vodka, a dangerous cocktail. Once again, he felt that strange sensation, the one he hadn't felt in a while, but now it was an overwhelming surge of primal rage, an uncontrollable fire consuming him from within. "Finally, he's up!" Kyle exclaimed, his grin widening, as he ran at Ben, unaware of the monstrous transformation he had just unleashed. And that's when it happened. Something inside Ben snapped utterly. His psyche shattered, all rational thinking gone, replaced by a terrifying void. All he could feel was the overwhelming, intoxicating urge to kill. He grabbed Kyle with unexpected force, pile drove him into the ground, then climbed on top of him and punched him directly in the heart. The blow stopped Kyle's heart immediately. Kyle gasped for breath, his eyes wide with terror and disbelief, as Ben relentlessly hammered down on him, punch after punch, a frenzied, savage rhythm. Blood gushed from Kyle's body, painting the floor crimson, until he took one final shuddering breath, a gurgle of death, and died. Everyone was staring at Ben now, the horrified parents frozen in shock, the crying kids, their innocent faces contorted with fear. Even Chad and Todd momentarily stunned into silence. Though momentarily dazed by the gruesome spectacle, they quickly broke from their trance and pointed their guns at Ben, their faces pale with terror and a new, desperate resolve. Ben saw the weapons aimed at him, the sudden shift in danger, and bolted for the back door, heading away from the house, leaving the carnage behind. "Get him!" Chad yelled, his voice cracking with panic. Todd let out a volley of shots, each one missing Ben as he ran upstairs, a target in a horrifying game. Chad and Todd followed close behind, their footsteps pounding, firing their final rounds of bullets, desperate to stop him. Ben ducked into the bathroom, slammed the door, grabbed the towel rack, and ripped it off the wall, transforming it into a makeshift weapon. Chad and Todd raced up, their knives ready, bursting into the bathroom. Chad swung his knife at Ben, who quickly backed away and slammed the towel rack against Chad's face with brutal force. Chad went down hard, unconscious, a crumpled heap. Now all that was left was Todd. He was more agile than Chad, ducking swiftly when Ben swung the towel rack, avoiding the blows. Todd dropped his knife, a calculated move, grabbed Ben by the neck, and pushed him violently against the wall. A bottle of bleach fell from the top shelf, spilling onto both of them, a caustic stream that burned their skin. They both screamed in agony, their cries echoing in the small room. Ben wiped his eyes as best he could, the bleach stinging, then pulled back the towel rack and swung it straight into Todd's head with a sickening thud. As Todd lay there bleeding, barely conscious, he let out an ominous, chilling smile, a last macabre gesture. "What's so funny?" Ben gasped, his voice raw and raspy from the chemicals and exertion. Todd pulled out a lighter, his hand trembling, and flicked it on, the small flame dancing. "It's funny," he croaked, his voice raspy and barely audible, "that you're covered in bleach and alcohol." Ben's eyes widened in horror as Todd, with a final burst of malevolent energy, threw the lighter at him. As soon as the flame made contact, the alcohol ignited instantly, turning Ben into a living torch. While the alcohol burned him with excruciating intensity, the bleach simultaneously discolored and ate away at his skin, a double torment. Ben let out a terrible primal screech as he burst into flames, engulfed by fire. He tried to roll on the ground, frantically, desperately to extinguish the fire, but it was no use. The alcohol had turned him into a walking inferno, unstoppable. He ran down the hall, a screaming, burning figure, then stumbled and fell down the stairs, collapsing in a heap. Everyone started screaming as they saw Ben, now a man on fire, drop to the ground, nearly dead. A horrifying spectacle. The last thing Ben saw was his mother and other parents desperately trying to extinguish the flames, their faces a mixture of terror and anguish. Then, mercifully, he passed out. When Ben woke up, his face was completely wrapped in thick bandages. He couldn't see anything, plunged into darkness. He felt bandages on his shoulders and stitches all over his body, a map of his injuries. He tried to stand up, but realized there was a tube inserted into his arm, anchoring him to the bed. He tried to get up again, a desperate attempt to move, and the tube threatened to pull out, a sharp tug. A nurse rushed in, her footsteps soft. "I don't think you can get out of bed just yet," she said gently, her voice calm and soothing, guiding him back into the bed and reinserting the tube with practiced ease. Ben lay there, blind and disoriented, with no idea of his surroundings, trapped in his own body. Finally, after what felt like hours of silent dread, he heard his mother's voice, thick with emotion and relief. "Honey, are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ben couldn't answer. His face was covered by the heavy bandages, rendering him unable to speak, his words trapped within. "Oh, honey, I have great news," she continued, her voice trembling with barely contained relief. "After the witnesses told the police that Kyle confessed to trying to attack you, they decided to let Sam go." That news made Ben almost bolt upright, a surge of adrenaline momentarily overriding his pain, stopping halfway as he remembered the tube in his arm. "He'll be out by tomorrow," his mother exclaimed, her joy palpable. "Then you two will be able to be together again." Ben's mother hugged him tightly, a tender embrace, and said her goodbyes, promising to return. The next couple of weeks were filled with visits from his family, their voices a comforting presence in the darkness. Then came the day when his bandages were finally to be removed. His family was all there, gathered around his bed, anxious to see what he would look like, a mixture of fear and hope on their faces. The doctors began unwrapping the layers of bandages from Ben's face with meticulous care. Everyone was on the edge of their seats, holding their breath, waiting until the last bandage covering his face was almost removed, a moment charged with a terrifying anticipation. "Let's hope for the best," the doctor murmured, his voice low. He swiftly peeled back the final strip of cloth, allowing the rest of the bandages to fall away from Ben's face. A guttural scream tore from his mother's throat. Sam and his father remained transfixed, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief at the sight. What happened to my face?" Ben stammered, his voice laced with confusion as he scrambled from the bed and stumbled toward the bathroom mirror. The reflection confirmed their anguish. It's monstrous." His lips, seared to a ghastly crimson, contrasted sharply with his skin, which was an unnatural stark white, almost bleached. His once brown hair was now a brittle, singed black. His fingers hesitantly grazed his altered skin, noting its unsettling, leathery texture. His gaze flickered between his horrified family and his grotesque reflection. "Ben," his father began, his voice strained with an effort to reassure. It's not quite so bad." "Not bad?" Ben repeated, a peculiar, unnervingly wide grin stretching across his altered features. "It's his parents. Look at during his doc, such if his Ben the soon as hesitant. Ben, it was Ben. They'd her son. Let me. Is there mom?" When he opened